Today we're going to be going over applying the toolkit and preparing and recovering for a disaster. So our case scenario here is a guy named Lewis. So Lewis is a lifelong resident of the Treme neighborhood in New Orleans. Lewis receives SNAP and SSI benefits and works side jobs like cutting grass and painting houses to support his wife and 2 kids. When it comes to money, Lewis feels like the system is working against him. His rent consumes a lot of his paycheck, and finding a stable job is very difficult. Lewis can only pay a portion of his bills, and there's rarely extra money for savings. In addition, hurricane season is usually very stressful for Lewis. He wants to be prepared this year but isn't sure how to get ready. He comes to your agency/office looking for financial strategies and advice about preparing for a disaster. So the ultimate question, of course, on the floor is, how do we help Lewis? So with the participants that are online right now, can you all point out some things that you see, some characteristics of Lewis and or his lifestyle? You can either unmute yourself to do so, or you can put it in the chat box.
I don't think he's used to budgeting.
Okay, that's a good one. Any other things that we might see going on with Lewis?
He's living paycheck to paycheck, I think.
Yes, he is. Sometimes underchecked, because if you see this part, Lewis can only pay a portion of his bills, which means sometimes he isn't even making enough money to pay his bills.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a list of 10 things that I pointed out from this scenario, and this is kind of how you evaluate people. So even though this is two small paragraphs, and it doesn't seem like it's a lot of information, it really is. So the first thing that I pointed out is that he's on government assistance. So he has SNAP and he has SSI benefits. The second thing that I pointed out was the fact that he's a renter, so he doesn't own any property. So he is constantly pouring into someone else's property, but he doesn't have anything for his own, for himself. The next thing was the fact that he had inconsistent part-time jobs. So cutting grass and painting houses. Cutting grass, as we know, is something that depends on the weather. And then, of course, painting houses, that also just depends on if someone is trying to do that. So these are jobs that's not really consistent. The other thing that I pointed out that might not be too obvious, but he kind of said it, is that he feels like the man is out to get him or against him when he said that the system is working against him. And in situations like this, especially when you hear a participant or someone say things like this, in my opinion, it is truly important to shy away from that. Don't feed into it. Don't try and don't let them use that as an excuse. Because there are, as you'll see, there are different things that we're gonna give as options for Lewis, but to have him be stuck on the fact that the system is against him is not something that we want to encourage. So the next thing, of course, is that he gets stressed during hurricane season. He doesn't know what he needs to be prepared, and that doesn't always mean financially. That could be as far as having everything else set in place too, like where are we gonna go, where are we gonna stay, how long will we have to stay. As you pointed out earlier, the fact that he's living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes not even making enough to pay his bills, which means he obviously can't save any money. And then he has a household to take care of. So that in itself could be a stressful event that's going on with him. So, how do we help Lewis knowing all of this information, right? That's the next step. So, this is Lewis walking into your office. So, good morning, Lewis. What brings you to the center today? I heard you give people free advice about money. That is true. Let's start off by talking about what goals you have in mind. So, the first thing is Lewis tells you that he wants to be able to pay his rent every month and to save a few dollars for emergencies. So these are what we would call short-term goals. Why? Because this is something that can be addressed now. It is something where you can literally see it happening in front of your face. And these goals are usually used as an encouragement because you can see it happening and it's actually like, hey, I can do this. And it helps transition them into long-term goals and actually sticking with long-term goals. So for the short-term goal, we asked, what do I want to achieve for myself or my family within 6 months? So 6 months are usually short-term goals. Anything longer than that are long-term goals. So as Lewis said, he wants to pay the rent every month and save $50. So how do we transition him into a long-term goal now? So after we've talked through Lewis's short-term goals and what it is, and he feels ready and comfortable, then we start talking about his long-term goals. And these are things that he wants to accomplish later or things that might take some time. So for Lewis, he wants to be able to finish his GED and get a stable job. So here's the second part of that conversation. Now that we know what your goals are, let's make them more concrete. What do you mean by making them concrete? We are going to set some conditions so that you can actually achieve them. Let's give it a shot. So here, this is us transforming the actual goal into a SMART goal. So of course, being specific, measurable, making it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So his first short-term goal was pay the rent every month. But the SMART goal would be putting a deadline on that, paying the rent on the first of the month for the next 3 months. So that way he can actually know what he's aiming for. To say pay the rent every month, that could mean at the end of the month, that could mean in the middle of the month, but then that also brings up other issues that could occur, like late fees for not paying the rent on time. So being able to provide a SMART goal instead of just a generic goal. And then for the saving $50 to start an emergency fund, giving him a way to save that. Because in his mind, $50 could be a hard thing to digest, knowing that he only has enough money to pay a portion of his bills. But if you say, hey, save at least $2 every week for the next 6 months, that'll equate to $50 for 6 months. And then on top of that, that makes it easier or more realistic on being able to reach that. The $2 is the amount of a candy bar in some stores, a drink. So there are small things that you end up telling them that they can give up to be able to save this $2, and it doesn't look as daunting as save $50. So the next question you'll ask in regards to the saving $50 is asking Lewis, where will he put his money? So we went over this a little in one of our earlier sessions. I believe it was session 2, talking about the different places where they can keep money and the different benefits, risks associated with where you're keeping it. So of course, a secret place in the home is an option because there's no cost, it's convenient, but It can also be destroyed. It can also be stolen. So are you willing to take that risk? With a family member or a friend, again, no cost, but they might not give it back in addition to it being stolen or destroyed. Putting it on a prepaid card, it's just like a bank card, so you can swipe it, you'll have easy access to it. The only problem with that might be fees that come with using a prepaid card, and then it's not protected if it's lost or stolen. And then, of course, a checking account, anything dealing with the bank, some type of bank account, but just being aware of the different fees that might come with any type of bank account, any stipulations that might help you avoid those fees, like if you have to make a direct deposit every month to avoid a bank fee, are you actually doing that or setting that piece up? So making sure they understand everything that's involved in actually getting an account with the bank. And then the last piece is a U.S. saving bonds. So of course the money cannot be lost or destroyed, and you'll have a paper bond where that will allow you to still be able to recover the funds. But of course, money loses value over time. Inflation is roughly 3% every year. So it'll lose some of the interest before it matures, and it's more difficult to access money right away if you put it in a savings bond because of the different fees that come along with early termination or early repurchase of things like that. So step 3, after you have given Lewis these SMART goals, so you're asking, do these goals sound like something you can easily do? He says, yeah, it sounds okay. Great. If you're interested, we can talk more about finding other ways to save. And he says, okay, as long as it doesn't take too long. Now, when you have someone that you're working with, and as I've stated multiple times, money is a very sensitive topic for most people, and it's because it reveals their lives. And when it comes down to setting up goals for people, you have to actually take it one step further. At the end of the day, they need to be able to evaluate all their situations surrounding them, to be able to know if they can actually achieve those goals. So even though we created a SMART goal for him to pay his rent on the first every month for 3 months and save at least $2 a week for the next 6 months, being able to track your expenses and being able to look over where your money is actually going is another way to be able to save money and reduce habits. So when you get into a situation after you've given someone a goal, they're going to be like Lewis. They're going to say, oh my gosh, is this going to take any longer? Like, how much longer? So they're going to be a little defensive because now they feel like in their mind, okay, I have my goal, so why can't I just go? So it's important to just have them understand the importance of being able to see what they do on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So if you're going to be using that toolkit, you can go in there and take this little template that's down here. That's the daily tracker that allows them to be able to see what they've spent money on a daily basis. And then, of course, you also have the weekly worksheets that are in the book that they can track it weekly if they want to, and so they can track just the items that they're doing. They can track the income that they're receiving as well. And so, as I said, this is something very important because let's say if normally food is the biggest overspender for everybody, because they look at groceries versus buying out or eating out differently. So if he's receiving SNAP benefits, is he utilizing his SNAP benefits to his maximum utilization, meaning he's not also going out and buying fast food just because? Like, so looking at those different, this tool will allow them to look at all of the things that they're doing and be able to address behaviors that might stop them from reaching their goals. And if someone tells you they don't have time, you can just tell them this is a very important step to making sure that you actually can reach your goals. And so, with that part being said, when it comes down to Lewis, one of the things he did say is that I don't know how to prepare for a disaster. And the biggest thing is most people actually don't know how to prepare for a disaster. Most people think, hey, let me pack up a suitcase with some clothes in it, and I'll just go somewhere, get on the road, and I'll figure it out when I get there. And most people don't like planning ahead. They don't like talking about it. If you are from New Orleans or was in New Orleans pre-Katrina, the entire mentality of most New Orleanians was the fact that a storm will never hit New Orleans. So many storms have turned at the last moment, and it will never come, it will never happen. And then Katrina occurs, whether some people still believe it was man-made or nature who destroyed New Orleans. One way or another, it happened, right? And thousands of people were unprepared and did not plan ahead or did not believe it. And so being able to actually just know what you need to bring with you if you're preparing to leave for a disaster besides clothes is, of course, really important, and also a fundamental step to be able to get back on your feet after the fact. So the first thing that's available, the first resource that's available to all of us when it comes down to figuring out what we need, FEMA has an emergency financial first aid kit that is a booklet that you can go online and you can get it either online or you can order it. And it goes over the different checklists, the things that people need when they are preparing for a disaster, how to protect your information, what other steps can you take, and then supporting the community if disaster strikes. So it gives a whole bunch of resources in this booklet. So here are some documents that people should have on hand when in the event that a disaster happens. So as far as your household, of course, making sure you take with you your lease, whether you're renting or own a home, because that is going to allow you to be. So if you like for me, I would take my tenants' leases with me. As far as if you own a home, making sure you're bringing your deed with you, because having this information is truly important so that way you can actually say where you were at the time that anything occurred, because that's how they're going to track you and be able to provide financial assistance. And then if you have any other housing, like it says a home equity line, that's for people who own houses, any type of insurances, being able to have those documents with them. And then as far as financial statements goes, being able to have now it does say if you don't have a copy of your lease or rental agreement, but I would say, as far as utility bills go, being able to have your last utility bill, like the most current utility bill with you, so that way if you do end up owing and the city doesn't swipe or wipe away any bills, you'll know what your last bill was as of that time when it occurred. And also, these are some things that are also digital, so you don't have to have a paper copy. But for some people who like carrying paper copies, like I know one of my friends has a file cabinet, a little 2-drawer file cabinet that she keeps everything in, because if she doesn't have access to the internet or something like that, at least she has her paper documents available. So being able to have your loan payments if they have vehicles, because if you're on the road and you have multiple vehicles, sometimes you can only take one, which is unfortunate. You end up having to leave one behind. So having that documentation to show that, hey, this is mine, to prove it, because people steal information, people will try and go and take the benefits that are allotted for you. So making sure you have your proof in line. And of course, the same thing with credit cards and student loan agreements. Um, any type of financial statements regarding alimony payments, child support payments, any elder care facility agreements. So if they have a parent that is in a nursing home and they're not, or in some type of form of a health facility and they're not taking the person. So I know nowadays you get the option in the nursing home or the facility will ask you when the season starts, would you like us to take your loved one or would you like to take your loved one? And if you opt for them to take your loved one because you know that they'll have everything that will allow them to keep your loved one safe and sound and all of their medical needs will be taken care of, making sure you have that agreement with you so you can know where they're taking them and how to contact them as well. And then any type of automatic payments agreements that you have. And then as far as financial accounts and assets, making sure you understand your insurance policies, if it's renter's insurance or if it's homeowner's insurance or if it's flood insurance, because as you know, during Katrina, a lot of people ended up not getting federal assistance because they didn't have flood insurance and they had homeowners insurance, and some homeowners insurance companies was saying we don't cover this, that should have been your flood. So making sure they're accounting for all of their sources of income, any tax statements, making sure that they're caught up on that. That's why we have so many blighted properties in New Orleans as of right now, because a lot of people just didn't keep up with their properties, didn't keep up with that information. And now if they wanted to come back, the cost to get the house is just completely outrageous. And so they ended up having to settle in other places. And definitely making sure that they have their will or trust in place, and then the power of attorney as well. Because after Katrina, I know for my family in particular, my grandmother ended up having 2 strokes. And so with that being said, if anything would have happened to her outside of her having 2 strokes, but she still recovered from it, but if she would have passed away, we wouldn't have had any documentation to be able to settle the house, settle any of her affairs, because it just happened from the stress of that storm. So if you are working with someone like Lewis who is concerned about whether they are prepared for a disaster, you can have them go online and try this interactive quiz. So I actually went on here myself and took the quiz. So it's the Disaster Financial Recovery. It's a free service by Operation Hope that will let you know how ready you are if an emergency happens, and do you have an action plan. And if you are not ready, it will actually send you an action plan based on your response. So some of the questions it asks you is if you have discussed your disaster relief plan with someone other than yourself. Like, so does your family know about it? Do your friends know about it? And if not, why not? Like, someone else needs to know what is going to happen, what's going on, so that, like, even if you don't have family or friends who could know that, making sure that there is someone who knows what's going on with you. It asks, do you have enough supplies in your house to be able to survive 3 days or more when a hurricane comes or a disaster hits, and I'm just like, oh no. So I have my own action plan that I have to go through because I didn't do that great on Are You Ready? So it was a great tool. It was easy. It's mostly yes or no questions. And as I said, it emails an action plan, and it's really easy to follow. So that's one resource to be able to kind of help them figure out whether or not they really are ready. Okay, and so the last piece is handling finances after a disaster. So the disaster is gone. What happens now? How do we recover and get back on our feet? And this was one of the biggest issues that we ended up having in New Orleans post Katrina. Most people didn't know how to get back on their feet. And so, because of that, we ended up, of course, losing part of our population. We ended up with these blighted homes, as I said earlier, and our community just has truly suffered because if you don't know those steps, what things you can do, what is out there, and if you don't move fast, that domino effect can last for a very long time. So these are just going to be some tips on applying for assistance, protection from fraud, and additional resources. And these are things that you all might be aware of. And if you are, then it'll just be a refresher. If you're not aware of it, then hopefully it will be a resource for you. So if your client is interested in applying for assistance, here are some things to consider. So first and foremost, they have to make sure that if they're trying to apply for any type of federal assistance, that it has been declared a disaster by the president. So in order to receive FEMA funds or anything like that, it has to be declared a federal disaster. And if they want to do that, they can apply online for the services at disasterassistance.gov. If they're using their phone, they can use that link that's on here, m.fema.gov. And they can also call if they don't want to have to deal with technology. And then the other option is normally when a disaster hits, and it has been declared by the president, there's always a center that goes up, and there's FEMA representatives there so they can apply in person. And they usually set it up close to whatever area the people who were affected by it are going. So this is how the website looks for disaster assistance. So they can go on here, put their zip code in if they're not sure if it has been declared a disaster, and then they can click on the find assistance if they're looking for what other options besides FEMA is out there for me to be able to get help. So if I need clothes, if I need food, where can I go? They can apply online, and then they can always go back and be able to check their status of the application online. So when applying for FEMA assistance, this is the information that everyone needs to make sure that they have. They, of course, need their social security number. They need current and pre-disaster addresses. So that's why their lease or mortgage paperwork is so important, because I don't honestly know if it started with Katrina, but I do know ever since Katrina, the process to get federal funds, especially from FEMA, is a little bit more stringent because people were stealing people's information and going to apply and taking their funds, and it wasn't caught till after the fact. So making sure that they're given a phone number where they can be contacted, they have their insurance information available, their total household annual income, if they want the money sent directly to a bank, the routing and account number. Otherwise, they might put it on a debit card and mail it to you, or they might send you out a check. Just depends on what option you choose, and a description of what you lost because of the disaster. So one thing that I encourage everybody to do is, if you know that there is a disaster, for the disasters that are known to come, I would say, Take pictures of everything in your house because pictures are dated in the background, and that way you can prove what you had. So that way it's not a fight if you are saying, hey, I had a 50-inch TV, and they're like, no, you're just saying that because you want us to pay you for a 50-inch TV. So being able to take pictures regularly to be able to keep up with the inventory of what you have in your house, because let's face it, when a disaster hits, you don't remember what you have. If you stay, you're trying to grab what you feel is most important in that moment, but it isn't. And if you evacuate, you're grabbing the essentials. So it's not until days later or weeks later that you actually realize I might have left something important, or oh my gosh, I forgot this, I forgot that. And you want to be able to have that information available to be able to make that claim. So as I said, I suggest pictures because they are, like I said, they are dated. And so that way, if something does happen, you can say, look, I have the photos of everything that was in my house. These are this was the latest batch of photos that I took. So that way, no one can dispute what you actually had. And then have your clients or the participants that you're working with become familiar with these tips. Now, I know for most New Orleans people, these tips might be etched in stone in their minds because a lot of people went through it. Dealing with federal workers who would say, oh, we'll help you, but you have to pay something, which is not true. Federal workers cannot solicit money or accept money. So making sure that if they are approached by someone who's saying they're a federal worker, that they ask for some type of government ID. And if they cannot provide ID, then okay, I, I, I'm sorry, I don't need your assistance. And making sure that they say it in a way that doesn't put them in a compromising or an unsafe situation. So if someone knocks on their door and says that I'm a federal worker, don't go off on them, essentially saying, show me your ID, like doing it with the attitude to where you alarm them. And it could potentially be a bad situation. Just asking in a very calm voice, is it okay if I see your ID? And then that might diffuse the situation just at that point. If they realize that you're asking them to prove something, they might just go away. So of course, safeguarding your personal information such as social security number and bank accounts, and being very cautious when providing it to people. So I know during disasters, everybody is going everywhere to try and get assistance. But again, there are some people who take advantage of those situations and set up fraudulent type of accounts, and even they go as far as setting up fraudulent entities where they'll ask you for your information, and then they'll use your information to be able to go and get the real resources you actually deserve. So then the last bullet point was being aware of people who are going door to door to either damaged homes. If you live in a neighborhood and you're noticing that people are going to homes that are empty or damaged, and then people who are contacting you and claiming to be contractors. We know all too well, especially in New Orleans, that when Katrina happened, there were so many building contractors that came saying, hey, I can help you, I can help you. And a lot of people ended up losing money, being scammed by these people because of either deposits that they put down, because they were just so emotional in those moments, or the entire amount that they paid because of their emotional situation. So just being able to evaluate situations, I think that's the most important thing. Giving your participants or clients some type of way or a tool to be able to take their emotion out of making decisions at those devastating times, because that's when scam artists take advantage of people because they're at their most vulnerable. So if you ever encounter any situations like this, or you see situations that may cause concern, you can actually report that matter to either the local authorities or the National Center for Disaster Fraud, where they can investigate those things and be able to actually see what's going on, and people might be able to recoup anything that happens. So then, of course, in the toolkit, if you are utilizing it, these are some of the tools that I showed you 2 slides ago, where these are the more personal type of fraud situations to avoid. So if your participants are going to be using the book, then they'll find these in the back. That'll just be more information for them to know how to fight fraud, or be able to prevent it from happening. And so the last slide, of course, is additional tools and resources that you may find useful to give your clients. And as I said before, some of these tools you already know of, some of these tools might be new to people. But you have, for financial preparedness, the ready.gov website. You have the Hope Coalition of America, Operation Hope. You have financial education for if loans, when you are in a financial disaster, what can happen with your loans. The Small Business Association, if you have any type of loans with them, what steps they ask you or suggest that you follow. And then, of course, the Personal Disaster Preparedness Guide, being able to know what you need to do for your family and yourself, making sure you're protecting your identity, avoiding local scams, being able to stay up on the type of scams that are occurring. So that's the CFTC fraud advisories. They kind of let you know what's happened, what's out there, so you can be aware of it. The disaster financial recovery score, and then finally the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, just being able to find out what your financial well-being is. So with that being said, we truly thank you for joining this 4-week series, and I hope you were able to get a lot of information out of it. And if you have any questions or concerns outside of this, you can contact Ben, who is the principal investigator, and his contact number is there, or you can contact Ashley, who's the project coordinator, and you all have my email address, I believe, and you can contact me if you have any financial related questions. And thank you all again for giving me the opportunity to be able to hopefully simplify this information and help you be one step more prepared to be able to help your participants and clients.